What if I told you that the man America honors today was once considered a danger to the nation? What if the voice we now quote was once silenced, monitored, and feared? And what if the dream we celebrate was born in a country that was not ready to hear it? This is not just the story of a speech. This is the story of a life shaped by faith, fear, courage, and resistance. This is the story of Martin Luther King, Jr. Before understanding the man, you must understand the world he was born into. America, in the early 20th century, was a nation divided by law and custom. In the South, segregation was legal. In the North, discrimination was quieter but present. Schools were separated, buses were separated, jobs were limited, voting was restricted. The phrase "separate but equal" was written into law, but never practiced in reality. This was the America that shaped Martin Luther King, Jr. Long before he ever stepped onto a podium, Martin Luther King, Jr. was born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. His father was Martin Luther King, Sr., a powerful Baptist preacher and a man who believed dignity was non-negotiable. His mother, Alberta Williams King, was a teacher, a musician, and the emotional anchor of the family. Their home was not wealthy, but it was disciplined, structured, and principled. From an early age, young Martin was taught two things. Faith was not passive, and silence in the face of injustice was its own kind of violence. Martin King was not an ordinary child. He was intelligent, curious, and deeply sensitive. He skipped 2 grades in school, often finding himself younger than his classmates, and sometimes feeling isolated because of it. But what shaped him most was not academics. It was contradiction. He was taught that all people were equal in the eyes of God, yet he watched adults treat others as lesser. He saw signs that told him where he could sit, where he could eat, and where he did not belong. Those moments did not turn into anger immediately. They turned into questions, and questions over time became conviction. At just 15 years old, Martin entered Morehouse College, a historically black institution in Atlanta. There, he studied sociology and began wrestling with a future he had not yet chosen. For a time, he resisted the idea of becoming a minister. He wanted to understand society, not just preach to it. But slowly, the influence of faith and philosophy merged. After graduating, he attended Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania. There, he encountered ideas that would shape his strategy forever. The moral power of nonviolence, the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, the belief that love could be political. Later, at Boston University, he earned a doctorate in systematic theology. Boston would also introduce him to someone who would shape his personal life as much as his public one. In Boston, Martin met Coretta Scott. She was intelligent, outspoken, and deeply aware of social injustice. Their relationship was not just romantic, it was philosophical. They married in 1953. Together, they would raise 4 children: Yolanda, Martin Luther King III, Dexter Scott, Bernice. But family life came at a cost. Threats were constant, privacy was rare, and fear was never far away. Yet Coretta remained more than a supportive spouse. She became a partner in purpose. In 1954, Martin Luther King, Jr. became the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. He was only 25 years old. Young, educated, well-spoken. At the time, he did not know Montgomery was about to change his life, or that he would change Montgomery forever. On December 1, 1955, a black woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus. She was arrested.
That single act of quiet defiance ignited a movement. Local leaders needed someone to lead a citywide response. They chose Martin Luther King Jr. Not because he was famous, but because he was new, respected, and unconnected to existing political rivalries. It was supposed to be temporary. It became historic.
The boycott lasted 381 days. Black residents walked miles to work, carpooled in secret, endured harassment and threats. Martin King's home was bombed. He was arrested. His life was threatened repeatedly. And yet, the movement remained nonviolent. This was not weakness, it was strategy. By refusing to retaliate, they exposed the brutality of the system for the world to see. In 1956, the Supreme Court ruled bus segregation unconstitutional. The boycott succeeded, but the cost was only beginning. Success brought attention, and attention brought danger. Martin Luther King Jr. became a national figure almost overnight. He helped found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to coordinate nonviolent protests across the South. But leadership came with weight. He was watched, followed, and increasingly feared by those in power. Not because he promoted violence, but because he mobilized conscience. Few people realize this. The United States government considered Martin Luther King Jr. a threat. The FBI monitored him extensively. Phones were tapped, meetings were observed, private moments were invaded. Attempts were made to discredit him publicly and destroy him privately. This was the cost of challenging deeply rooted systems. And yet, he continued. In 1963, more than 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. The March on Washington was meant to demand jobs and freedom. When Martin Luther King Jr. spoke, he delivered words that would echo through history. But the dream was not poetic fantasy, it was a moral demand. And while the world applauded, not everyone in America listened. If this story is helping you see Martin Luther King Jr. not as a symbol, but as a human being, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support allows stories like this to be told with depth, honesty, and respect. After the applause faded, the resistance grew stronger. Many white moderates grew uncomfortable. Some allies stepped back. When King spoke against the Vietnam War, he lost political support. When he shifted focus to economic inequality, he was labeled radical. The dream had expanded, and America was uneasy. Martin Luther King Jr. had achieved global recognition, but the most dangerous part of his journey was still ahead. Because the closer he came to challenging power itself, the more isolated he became, and the more dangerous his message appeared to those who feared real change. By the mid-1960s, Martin Luther King Jr. was no longer just a civil rights leader. He was becoming something far more unsettling. He had proven that peaceful mass movements could win. He had forced the government to respond. He had shown the world America's moral contradictions. And that made him dangerous. Not because he encouraged violence, but because he revealed power without fear. At first, the struggle had focused on segregation, buses, schools, voting booths. But Martin Luther King Jr. understood something deeper. Legal equality meant little without economic justice. Millions of Americans, black and white, were still trapped in poverty. And poverty, he believed, was violence in slow motion. This shift in focus changed everything. King began speaking openly about wealth inequality. He criticized systems that valued profit over people. He questioned why a nation that could fund wars could not feed its poor. This made former allies uncomfortable.
Some politicians distanced themselves, some newspapers turned critical, some supporters quietly withdrew. The message was clear. Civil rights were acceptable. Economic justice was not. In 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. took his boldest step yet. He publicly opposed the Vietnam War. He called it immoral, unjust, and destructive, not only abroad, but at home. He argued that war drained resources from social programs and deepened inequality. The backlash was immediate. Media outlets accused him of betrayal. Political leaders warned him to stay silent, but he refused, because silence, to him, was complicity.
Behind the public image, Martin Luther King Jr. was exhausted. He faced constant threats, endless travel, relentless pressure. He suffered from depression. He doubted himself. He questioned whether America would ever listen. Yet each morning he rose again, not because he was fearless, but because he believed the cause was larger than his fear. The surveillance intensified. The FBI continued monitoring his calls, his movements, his private life. Attempts were made to discredit him publicly and humiliate him privately. None of it stopped him. But it revealed a disturbing truth. The greatest threat to King did not come from extremists alone. It came from institutions afraid of mass awakening. In early 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. traveled to Memphis, Tennessee. Sanitation workers, mostly black, were striking for fair wages and dignity. King saw their struggle as the embodiment of everything he had been fighting for: race, labor, human worth. Despite exhaustion, he joined them because he believed this campaign could unite America's poor across race and class. On April 3, 1968, King delivered his final speech. It was not planned as a farewell, but it sounded like one. He spoke of danger, of threats, of having seen the future. He said he might not get there with them, but he was not afraid. The room felt it. History listened. The next day, April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot while standing on a balcony at the Lorraine Motel. He was 39 years old. News spread rapidly. Grief turned into rage. Cities erupted in unrest. America stood still. A voice that had shaped a generation was silenced, but the questions remained. In the days that followed, mourning swept across the country. Riots broke out in over 100 cities. National Guard troops were deployed. Some mourned the man, others feared the consequences. But one truth was undeniable: America had lost its moral compass bearer. Over time, Martin Luther King Jr. became a symbol. A holiday was created, monuments were built, quotes were repeated. But many of his most radical ideas were softened. His opposition to war, his criticism of capitalism, his demand for economic justice, those parts were often ignored. It was easier to celebrate the dream than confront the demands behind it. Martin Luther King Jr. did not live to see the world he imagined, but he changed the direction of history. He proved that courage does not require violence, that leadership does not require hatred, and that moral clarity can shake empires. His life reminds us that progress is never given, it is demanded, that justice is never comfortable, it is disruptive, and that true peace requires sacrifice. Martin Luther King Jr. did not leave behind a finished dream. He left behind a responsibility to question, to challenge, to care. The struggle did not end with him.